Welcome to another episode of EDPS Talks, where together with our guests, we explore their unique perspectives on data protection and privacy and how these shape their respective fields. Today, we are incredibly honored to welcome someone who has been a driving force behind the evolution of data protection across Europe and beyond. Our special guest has been a true pioneer in shaping the privacy landscape. Mr. Peter Hustinx is a highly respected expert in data protection and privacy law who served as European Data Protection Supervisor from January 2004 till 2015. Mr. Hustinx contributed to the building of the new supervisory authority and developing its role at the EU level. Under his leadership, the EDPS not only established itself as an independent authority, but became a powerful voice in shaping policies that protect citizens' rights in an increasingly digital world. We are thrilled to have you here with us to share your reflections on the past, your insights on the present, and vision for the future of data protection. Thank you for joining us, and welcome to EDPS Talks, Peter.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
We always start the talks with an icebreaker. I don't think we need to break the ice here, as we know each other for many years now. Nevertheless, I think it will be very interesting to hear from the first supervisor, what does privacy mean to you, and how do you apply it in your everyday life?
Well, first, it reminds me of the subject that drew my attention in the very beginning of my legal career at the Dutch Ministry of Justice, more than 50 years ago, and that resulted in so many interesting developments. We quickly realized at the time that privacy was essential for the free exercise of other fundamental rights and a cornerstone of a free and democratic society. But in view of the expected development of information and communication technologies, we also thought, and it was clear, that it needed to be reinforced with a structural approach, a more proactive approach. That led to the invention of data protection as a concept, but also as a system of checks and balances consisting of principles and rights and procedures and independent supervision. Now, that approach has then been recognized in EU law as a fundamental right of its own, the right to data protection, and as a general legal basis for far-reaching rules, such as in the GDPR. Looking back at that whole development over many years, from its inception to its current state of play, that is still a real source of fascination and satisfaction for me, as you can imagine. But on a more personal level, I've always been quite reserved about my own personal and family life, and that means being careful about what to share and not to share. Means not active on social networks, except in a very limited, low-key fashion on LinkedIn, and also quite selective if it comes to the use of WhatsApp. That's unavoidable with grandchildren, but also with friends. However, I'm not a fundamentalist. I'm not a fundamentalist, but a careful, principled pragmatist who also makes good use of new technologies where it adds real value to life.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Peter. Well, 20 years ago, you became the first European Data Protection Supervisor. Since then, the world obviously has massively changed, and the EU regulatory approach tried to follow or to even anticipate the future. We moved from Directive 95/46 to the GDPR, then to a full digital rulebook. How do you see the EU in this global landscape, and what are we doing good, and what should we improve?
I see different things. Let's first recognize the leading role the EU has played in developing the present rulebook on data protection. But the Council of Europe was the real pioneer with Convention 108 and a series of recommendations. The EU then used that convention as a starting point with further specifications and adding new elements. After a while, this was followed by the EU Charter, Article 8, and the GDPR more recently as directly applicable legal instruments. That development, and more specifically the scope and the substance of the GDPR, have had a profound impact all over the world, now well known as the Brussels effect, which is visible in the number of countries having similar legislation. I think we're approaching the 100 now. So the same, I would expect, is likely to happen with the rest of the present rulebook, including the AI Act. But there is also a downside. Over the years, we have seen a stronger protection and greater consistency across the EU. But there is still considerable diversity in the way these rules are applied and enforced. In spite of all efforts of regulators, in spite of all efforts to improve harmonization and consistency. Now, unity and diversity are both essential for the EU. In fact, the tension between the two are also a driving force. But we should not underestimate that there is also the problem that there is complexity and lengthy procedures. Legal procedures, enforcement procedures take time. And that is also visible across the world. So that explains the criticism that is often heard about the way in which these rules are enforced in practice. All regulators, I say that again, are working hard, but the results of their efforts are also visible. And I think that we would welcome some further improvement there.
If we now look a bit at the present and the future, we see that each tech development brought changes across fields and sectors. Today, we have machine learning, a system that fuel large language model, and so generative AI. Nowadays, we have enormous computer capacity that manages to analyze giant data sets fed with data, including personal data, from all around the world. Taking that into consideration, what are the possibilities, the new possibilities and the risks that come together, and how policymakers should act responsibly to keep Europe competitive with the high level of protection of fundamental rights that you just mentioned, but at the same time keeping the pace of the rest of the world?
I think that's a real challenge. There is no doubt that machine learning systems have made great progress, and that the various AI systems that are now emerging have created fantastic new possibilities in healthcare and education and so on. And that even it also poses great challenges, as I mentioned. We should not forget that all technology, including AI, is man-made, and that even the most intelligent systems are made by humans and require massive amounts of data to be trained and to be used in practice. And that means that any deficiencies, any blindness, or even prejudices in their production may lead to outcomes that are unacceptable. So we are walking on new territory with unexpected outcomes due to a lack of transparency as a real problem. There are many unknown factors here. So substantial verification and testing of systems before and after their deployment, both by developers and by users, is therefore very important. I also want to make the point that the new rules of the AI Act come in addition to the GDPR that continues to apply to the processing of personal data, training data, use data, etc. However, the new rules seem to deal with two R's: risks and responsibility. In the case of the GDPR, the risk-based approach was followed to ensure sufficient attention for context in applying the rules. In the AI Act, risk is more of a threshold condition. Both developers and deployers should therefore deal with possible risks as early as possible. Risks, the possible impacts, negative consequences, etc., and any malfunctioning, bias, etc. Now, the way in which this is practiced, the governance we see may vary, and this requires different government arrangement. I'm not going into the details, but there is a large consensus about this essence, and I think time will help to find the right details to apply this in practice. But we need sort of a virtuous circle of testing and learning and improving, etc., and empirical research and coming back to the wonderful new technology to make it better.
Peter, what you just said brings me to the next question, which I think is very relevant as well, because we might expect that privacy risks are continuing to grow. Mm. Also, AI risk will only get more complex. However, with complexity comes the opportunity, in my view, to also innovate. Mm. Can we leverage AI to solve potential data privacy risks by getting AI-driven recommendation prompts and trends across data?
Well, here we come to sort of the end of the river, and I do not exclude that AI systems may come up with solutions for new problems, or may highlight weaknesses that we were not aware of. And in this analysis verification, AI can also develop more feeling for what we do not want to see. And I do not exclude it, but I would be inclined to rely more on well-structured governance and systematic assessments with the help of virtuous circles, which I mentioned, than on the blind and routine use of AI. That over time experience, again here, may show the best way forward in this respect. I don't exclude it, but I would not be so keen to rely on the inherent innovative power of something unknown for the time being.
Mm-hmm. Peter, if we go back now to this new legislation in Europe, well, on the 1st of August of this year, the EU AI Act came into force. Mm-hmm. It's the globally first democratically established regulatory tool to govern AI. Mm-hmm. Do you think that the AI Act can become a global standard in the same way as we have experienced a Brussels effect for the GDPR that you just mentioned at the beginning of our talk?
Well, the EU's AI Act already serves as an interesting example for other countries in the world. It's very visible, the pioneering work of the European Union in that respect. And so, to that extent, the Brussels effect is already playing a role. But development of AI has also been looked at in other jurisdictions, and particularly in the US. And President Biden's executive order on the safe use of AI, or something to that effect, also contains some interesting elements. I'm currently on the board of an NGO, the Center of Democracy and Technology, which is based in Washington, D.C. and in Brussels, and that takes part in the discussions on both sides of the ocean. And in fact, CDT has set up its own AI governance lab and contributes to the discussions on that basis. Leaving details aside, I do see, therefore, a large consensus on the essential elements of a sound approach on and the importance of getting it right. Risks and responsibility dealing as the starting point. In spite of constant change, well, we come to that. We have to see what the new US administration, of course, will do, and which role the relevant industry will be allowed to play. If things do not go in the right direction, then we might have a problem.
Peter, this brings me to my last question. You were just mentioning also this new political changes in Europe and in the US. But by being both positive and skeptic, how do you envisage our society and our democracies in the next 20 years?
Olivier, I have the advantage of a long memory in this field, which is much longer than the 20 years you referred to, the memory. And what strikes me when overseeing the development in data protection over the years, that there has been continuity and change, continuous change and continuity. In spite of constant technological change, there has been a remarkable continuity in the principles we apply, an increasing emphasis on the implementation of the principles and not so much on reinventing the principles. And that's true in the EU. It's also true in the rest of the world, and at least in those countries that take part in the OECD. Now, on that basis, experience in the past are no guarantee for the future, I know, but I would expect the same for the next 20 years. That is continuity and change, continuous reinventing the ways we apply the principles in new context. And I admit that this may take different shapes. The continued health of our democracies is an important condition for this. But even if we see developments that give some reason for concern, I feel that it is much better to stay on the positive side and work to strengthen the forces that are needed to help our democracies to survive, stay healthy, and go on in this flexible way.
Peter, thank you very much. This is a perfect way to bring us to the end of today's episode. We have discussed with you various perspectives on data protection topics. I like very much when you said about continuity, the protection of fundamental rights, despite the new technologies, the evolution of the world, of the democracy. So this kind of continuity, integrity, I like it very much. It was in any case a great honor to have you here today. Mr. Hustinx, thank you so much. We hope these insights give you a fresh perspective on privacy and data protection. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to catch up on recent interviews and follow the EDPS on our channels to discover more about our projects marking our 20th anniversary of the European Data Protection Supervisor. I am Olivier Rossignol, and our today's guest was Peter Hustinx, the first European Data Protection Supervisor. Thank you for being here, and see you in our next talk.
Thank you, Olivier.
Welcome.